second. I just touched my face. Let's do that again. Hi, welcome to the second Influx lockdown discussion with me, Kit Kalis, and my compadre, Gary Budden. We are going to be talking about rejections and acceptance, both in a literary sense and a spiritual sense. But I think the spiritual stuff will be off air, so you're only going to hear about the literary stuff. We're going to be talking about what we take as submissions, what we consider, what we reject, how we accept, tips for writers, also as writers ourselves who have been published in other places, what it feels to be rejected and accepted, and that we've kind of both got feet in either side of the pond, really. So we have much.
I was going to say either side of the fence. We sort of exist on both sides of the fence.
Yeah, I've always considered you to be more of a on the fence sitter, Gary. But sure, I mean, you know, yeah, we do. Yeah, either side of the fence, feet in two ponds, whatever.
Well, there's a discussion, isn't there, about gatekeepers, and I suppose editors being a sort of gatekeeper, which there's probably some truth to that, but we are also both writers, we're both published writers, so we've definitely experienced both sides of it, which we're going to talk about more, which I think it's been beneficial for me. I don't know if it's been beneficial for you, but we'll get to that.
In the sense that, yeah, like I hate editors and I hate writers, so I just... No, it is interesting to see both sides, because I think, you know, when they don't talk to each other or you don't have the other experience, you can often project what is happening on the other side of things.
Absolutely, yeah. And from my perspective, my background with this, I've sort of been a slush pile reader for Ambit magazine, and I've worked as a commissioning editor, did some commissioning editing work for Unsung Stories and at Titan Books, as well as Influx. I've done sort of slush pile reading for some prizes for Spread the Word. So I've got quite a lot to say about the acceptance and rejection process. I mean, what's your commissioning background?
Well, other than Influx, not a lot. I think, yeah, probably Influx, and then I've done some competition judging, but that's after the slush pile has been gone through, and then you get a shortlist. So no, but I've certainly been on the other end, possibly in different ways than you have, because I've done a lot of journalism and article writing, which is a very different way of pitching and writing and being accepted. So I could definitely talk about that later. But yeah, in terms of commissioning and things like that, I think most of it is through Influx, and your experience in the more commercial side of things at Titan, I think will be really interesting to hear. Mm-hmm. So as a structure, I guess maybe you can just talk about what we're going to go through.
Yeah, so we were going to talk about how we find new work. So when I say we, I mean the two of us as commissioning editors at Influx Press, how we find new work and why and what we look for. And then I think we were going to talk a bit more about our experiences as writers, maybe as fiction writers. Maybe you could talk a bit about your Wetherspoon's Carpet book, how that got picked up.
Yeah.
Because I don't know the ins and outs of that kind of non-fiction book. And then we were going to talk about how to handle rejection, how people can handle rejection, what we can learn from that, because that's definitely the hardest part of all this, whether you're submitting short stories or you're submitting a novel. But that's the basic structure.
I agree. I also think with rejection is hard to give as much as it is to take, I think.
It is, yeah.
So we can definitely talk about how editors feel when they reject something, and the kind of, I guess, the emotional responsibility of that, and stuff like that. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I've got a page of little scribbled notes here about just that subject. So
oh wow. Okay. So rather just crack on. We've already wasted 3 minutes. So okay. So let's start with. I think we both commission some similar books, some very unsimilar books. I think that's the strength of Influx, is that we have different tastes. So we end up having a much broader list or wider ranging list than perhaps we would if it was just us on our own individually.
Yeah, definitely.
Or working with someone who basically has exactly the same taste. But maybe we can talk about that a little bit. So I guess I'd be interested in when you get sent a book, either by an agent or unsolicited, what is the thing that grabs you? What makes you start reading and B, continue reading?
Well, it's funny that you've put it in that way. So if I was to get a manuscript now, with not through an agent, and we didn't have a submissions window open, I would have to say, in the fairness of when we do have submissions windows open, that we wouldn't be able to consider it. That I would say, I often reply politely now saying, thanks for your submission, but we're currently closed for open submissions. And there is a reason for that, because it's just an issue of time, isn't it? When was the last open submission period we had open? Remind me.
January.
And that was for?
Non-fiction by women.
Non-fiction by women. So that was quite a specific open submissions window. But let's say we are open for submissions and it comes to an agent or through unagented, as a writer without an agent. What am I looking for? That's a really good question. Just something that, obviously it sounds silly to say this, but something that I enjoy immediately reading, but something that just grabs my attention. That's really the key thing that I'm looking for, something that feels a little bit maybe forward facing in terms of its content and maybe its style. Something obviously I have to enjoy, and I'm also thinking, is this something that Influx can publish? So it's not the same as me reading for pleasure. I read a lot of different kind of fiction, especially that I wouldn't publish through Influx Press.
Okay, so that's probably one of the most common forms of getting a rejection as a writer is it's not for us, or we wouldn't be the right people to publish it. Can you explain a little bit what that means in greater depth? I mean, obviously I understand it, but when you say that sort of thing, we wouldn't publish it or it's not for us, what are the key elements to that?
It's interesting because I would say Influx Press isn't a particularly specific publisher in what we publish. It's not like we focus only on literature and translation or anything like that, but we're also not and I don't think we would discount any kind of writing from genre necessarily, but I would say if someone sent us a hard sci-fi novel or a space opera, it might be brilliant. I enjoy some of those novels myself. That isn't what we're doing. I think we're mainly looking at kind of contemporary, not necessarily experimental, but contemporary fiction and non-fiction. So if it's clearly within a defined genre, I think it would be unlikely for us to publish it.
Yeah, it's almost as if we're publishing things that aren't in a specific genre. Mm-hmm. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a genre unto itself, like literary fiction or whatever they want to call it. But it's something that if it fits, like you say, some very sci-fi space opera thing, or perhaps like romance or crime, like a police procedural crime book, like that's very much, I think, a specialism of certain imprints and certain editors and certain publishing houses. And they would do a better job of it. They have the market already there. They have the audience already built up that we don't have. So we would have to build that entirely from scratch if we took on, say, a police procedural crime book. That's kind of what we mean, I think.
Yeah, you've basically said what I was going to say. I want to be very clear that it's not a case of snobbery, and it's not a case of we think those sort of genres are lesser in any way. It's just I do think I would not be best qualified to be able to gauge of what is the best kind of police procedural crime writing at the moment. And I do think there are specialist imprints and certain editors who are very, very good at that. So that is one reason why we might not do it.
Right, and say some publisher like Orenda, they're an independent publisher to do crime fiction very well. They wouldn't take on a a sort of high literary short story collection that does where nothing really happens.
Absolutely.
You know, it's just they wouldn't know. Not they wouldn't know how to publish it. They wouldn't have the right things behind it or the foundation and what in which to publish it.
Yeah. So what do you look for when you get sent a submission, agented or unagented?
If like we say, if it's during a window that we've opened and it's unagented or it's from an agent, I think the first thing is just to know what the ideas are in the book. So you can write a book as brilliantly as you want, but if I'm not taken by what you're trying to say rather than how you're saying it, I do find it a stumbling block. For me, I need fiction, particularly. Obviously, non-fiction is all about ideas, so that doesn't really work. But yeah, in fiction, if I read the synopsis first and I feel like, oh wow, this is about something. There's something I can get my teeth into here in terms of what I can think. What is it going to inspire me to think about?
Yeah.
And so, for example, one of the books we've got coming up, Between Beirut and the Moon by Naji Bhakti, that was basically about growing up in a war-torn country, but how that operates within a family unit where one mother is one religion and the father is of another religion, and then how does sectarian violence outside manifest within the house?
Yeah.
Now, that sounds like quite a convoluted idea, but that's what grabbed me about it. It helped
because
the writing
because it was different. Because it was
it's talking about something I had not read about really, and it's doing it through coming of age, very classic kind of coming of age story, humor told from a boy's perspective, young lads. You know, it's got all the tropes of Submarine by Joe Dunthorne, or maybe even Catcher in the Rye or something, but it's talking about something else.
Yeah.
So that's where I get grabbed is in the subject matter.
Yeah, so we're talking a little bit here about almost like the pitch or the kind of the cover letter that accompanies it. So I think would be true with me as well. That kind of subject matter, if it's immediately grabbing, I'm going to probably prioritize something in the slush pile. So you mentioned Beirut and the Moon. Another novel we've got coming out this year is Boy Parts. I remember you're probably talking more about how that manuscript came to us, but I remember reading the pitch for that book, and I was like, it seemed so unusual, potentially controversial, and kind of funny. I thought I have to give this a go immediately, and so that grabbed me. So if it had, if you write, I suppose, a boring description of your own book, I don't know, would you think it would do the book damage? And it's hard when a book doesn't have as clear a hook. I think that can be a problem.
Yeah, but all books are about something.
Yeah, it can't be about nothing, can it?
No, well, unless you're Lee Rourke, when that's your thing that you're writing about nothing. But yeah, if you don't know what you're writing about, I think that's a problem.
Yes, yeah.
So it doesn't have to have like a grandiose hook of it's about secular violence inside a non-secular house, or whatever, right? It can be about next to nothing if you like, but there's going to be a character in it, and you're exploring something with a character, so it's going to be about someone who something is happening to them.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a real skill in writing a synopsis. That's what agents are good at.
I was going to say, this leads us on to the difference between the unagented submission and going through agents. So obviously a literary agent's role is partly, one of their many roles, is partly to kind of create that pitch, isn't it? They're acting as the salesperson. So I was going to ask you, I mean, I'm trying to think with Influx, do you think we've had more of a hit rate with stuff that's come through unagented or agented? So the last time we were open for anyone to submit was January of last year, wasn't it?
No, it's January this year, wasn't it?
When we were open just for blanket.
Oh, anything. Yeah, that was January. Yeah, January 2019. Yeah.
And we received, it was pushing up towards about 400 submissions, wasn't it? So
At least.
at least.
Poor Sanya.
If,
Sanya has to read all of the slush pile before us, more or less. But yeah.
Yeah, and if we're doing 10 books this year, you can work out. I can't do the maths right this second, but it's a very small percentage of it. So it has to stand out, doesn't it? That immediate kind of pitch, that immediate letter, it has to.
Yeah, it has to stand out, and I think because you're in a pile, your manuscript is in a pile with other people. You have no idea what the other people are writing about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's so difficult because you don't want to judge a book just on its synopsis, but we can't read every book cover to cover.
No.
Or not cover to cover, like end to end. So there needs to be some filtration process. Otherwise, we wouldn't do any other work.
Yeah, it's very
be able to make or sell the books that we already have.
Yeah, I'd say the good pitch, the good cover letter, that almost helps you get through the door, doesn't it? The book's still got to be good. There's no guarantee.
Oh yeah, you could have a terrible book after a great synopsis.
Yeah. And vice versa, you could have a great book without a good synopsis, but I would say that's the one more at risk of falling through the cracks. Because like you said, we only have X amount of time to spend on reading submissions. We are human beings. Yeah. We are human beings after all, aren't we? And there's only so much you can read per week.
Yeah, and also that if you haven't made the I guess from my perspective, this works a couple of times. If you write a terrible email, or you can't be bothered to address me, you, or Sanya by name, then I can't be bothered to read your manuscript. Secondly, if you write a bad synopsis, that makes me feel like you don't know what you've written. So then how am I supposed to know what you've written?
Yeah.
And also, if you write a synopsis that isn't clear or doesn't have a sense of the book itself, that doesn't necessarily mean that, well, that kind of indicates to me that you're writing in the novel that you're doing the synopsis for is not going to be that good either. And then there's slightly different skills, writing a synopsis and writing a novel, but you're still writing.
You're still writing. So you're saying that you should dedicate as much time to that. Well, not as much time, but as much effort, put as much thought into it. Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. It's something you mentioned there, maybe leads us into, perhaps we could talk about unagented submissions, at least a few kind of do's and don'ts. There's something you mentioned there about getting editors named correct, that's very true. I remember working at Ambit and was still getting lots of letters addressed to J.G. Ballard, who of course was dead by that point, and he hadn't worked at the magazine for I think 20, 30 years at that point. So there's an extreme example of kind of poor research about who you're writing to. A big don't for me is
maybe people. Sorry, with that particular example, maybe people just like the idea of writing to J.G. Ballard.
Well, I mean, it's pretty cool, isn't it? But it wasn't him reading it. It was me.
The modern J.G. Ballard.
Yeah, by that point, I think that would be in about 2011. So he'd been dead for 5 years. That's enough time to sort of do your research. I was going to say something that people do occasionally, and this for me would be an immediate disqualification, is sending out a blanket email to various publishers, small publishers, which is bad enough, I think, but then also CCing everyone rather than BCCing, which has happened way more times than you might think, than people watching this might think. And I just, I politely say, that we have to decline on this. I have started to say, try it in a nice way. It's best not to CC in everyone else you're sending this to, because it looks really, really bad. And it shows that lack of preparation, I think.
It definitely is my favorite thing that happens. Like when you get one in, it goes, dear sir or dear publisher, like I've been looking at your list and I think it really fits, and it's been sent to like 40 people. And you can see it's been sent to 40 people. You're like, yeah, you haven't actually been looking at my list, have you? You've just found my email address and put it in the CC box.
Yeah, and it's particularly funny with the small press world, because they're probably CCing in people we know as well. These are people we know from the other publishers.
It's funny. I mean, that's a definite don't. Also, we've had it where it'll be, you, Sanya, and me are the three people who are going to read the work, and it will say "Dear Sirs," which is very alienating to Sanya.
What should they say?
Dear editors, perhaps.
Dear editors is good.
Or dear Gary and Sanya. I mean, we're on our own website. If you found out how to submit to us, you're on our website.
So I think the key thing we're saying here is just that little bit of research and sort of tailoring who you're writing to can really pay off, because if you do cock it up, as we're saying, it's likely that editors will probably just decline. They won't even look at it.
I mean, the thing I say to people, if I'm doing a workshop or on a panel or something, is I'm looking for any excuse to say no.
Yeah.
And you give me an excuse to say no, and I'm going to say it and move on to the next thing. So if you've screwed up the email, I'm not going to look at it. If you do bad synopsis, it's another reason for me not to. If I'm going to be going through 400 books, I need to be able to decide yes and no quickly. And if you make that process easier, then I'm going to say, like, as in, if you make it easy for me to say no, I'm going to take that opportunity.
So do you think the process is different when we're receiving stuff from literary agents? Because there's a whole other discussion, I think, here about how writers get an agent, which we don't have time for here. I don't know, could you talk a little bit about their role, how it's different to getting unagented stuff?
Yeah, I mean, once you have an agent, that's your first step as a writer. If you're not, and lots of writers don't have agents, which is fine, but they have publishers. So that's one thing. But when you have an agent, they, in a way, are allowed to contact us. There's a unspoken thing of, yes, if you're sending something out, agents can. If agents are sending something out and they send it to you, that's fine. We're not saying don't send us anything. It's not like we have submission windows for agents. But I think that the agents who work well, who are good, are the ones who send to publishers and editors they think, and only they think, will like the book. So
Absolutely.
I'll be sent books from agents who, it doesn't seem like they've done their research either. But there are others who are like, hi Kit, and I might have met them at something, or I've, maybe we've had an author that they've also represented, or they represent someone that we know, or it's a little bit like that. But out of the blue, could be, hi Kit, really loved Imaginary Cities, or I know you edited Claire Fisher and Shireen Pinto. I think this book sits in between those two writers. That to me is like, automatically I'm interested. Because they know what they've done, the research as to what I like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense, and that's why we have certain relationships with specific agents now, isn't it? And you can kind of have that dialogue, so they know really that they're not wasting their time and our time by sending stuff. So we're letting them know that this is the kind of stuff we're looking for, and then they hopefully send us kind of relevant material. How else do we find it?
It's kind of reflective in, like some people who buy lots of our books, who enjoy what we publish, they will look at a book we publish just partly because we published it. Oh, I liked the last 4 short story collections they did. This is a new one I've never heard of, but lots of people do that. They will buy it and go, yeah, I mean, you guys published it. That system almost works similarly with agents. Where an agent who represents an author I like, who might be published somewhere else, comes to me with an author, we're like, oh, okay, you might have the same taste as me, so maybe that's a good match. I think no one wants to waste anybody else's time, and publishing, a lot of publishing is about finding the people who like the stuff that you like.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, definitely. Are there any other ways we find books?
Yeah, we're quite famous for doing random commissions. I mean, there is a lot of our books don't come through either of those processes, which is why I think we sometimes sometimes have authors that no one really knows they exist until we announce them, and then everyone's like, "Oh wow, I've never heard of this person," or "I didn't know this book had been written," and that's because the relationship is only between us and the author.
Yeah.
A lot of publishing, when agents send things out on submission, they send them to 4 or 5, 6 different publishers, and then there's a little bit of hype that grows. Oh, like, have you been? There's an auction. Some people are bidding on it, whatever. And then by the time that book is announced by, let's say, Bloomsbury, the random Faber editor who also read it will know about that author. But with us,
so the people in the know kind of already know that this book, is a thing.
Yeah. Whereas with us, if we're commissioning directly, and no one knows that book exists, then it's a surprise to everybody when it comes out, which I think is quite a good thing sometimes.
So what's the difference between this and the unagented submission? Is there a difference?
This is either where we've asked an author specifically to write a book, or it's come to us in a very roundabout or left field way, I suppose. So like Ellie's Williams is one of our classic examples where, you can talk about that probably if you want to discuss how that happened.
Yeah, it was quite simple. I knew Ellie through my work at Ambit, and just really liked her short fiction. And we approached her and said, did she have a collection? And she had many, many stories published in all the various different literary journals. So I wouldn't say she was unknown at all, but I don't think she had at that point a collection that she was kind of shopping around. So that's literally how it came about. I liked her work enough to think we would publish a collection of that work, and that's how it happened. So that felt like a really nice organic process.
And we also saw her read her work.
Yes, numerous events.
So that's one way of just sort of asking someone to write a book when you've seen their work other places. With Jeffrey Boakye, with the Hold Tight, the book about grime, that came to me because a friend of mine, who also happened to be a friend of Jeffrey's, pointed me to his blog and a bunch of stuff he'd written, and said that he was sort of thinking about writing a book. And I contacted Jeffrey and just said, "Are you thinking about writing a book?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I would like to publish something on grime and, masculinity and that sort of stuff." And so we kind of...
You heard the word grime and book and your ears sort of pricked up.
Yeah, they did, yeah. But that was totally informal. And then Jeffrey said yes. And then we worked out from there. And then with Naji, with his book in Beirut, that came to me because his ex-PhD tutor sent it to me. So almost like an agent, but not actually an agent, So it wasn't sent from Naji himself, but his ex-PhD tutor sent it to me. And then when Eliza, who wrote Boy Parts, was coming out, she was working at Mislexia and did a pitching event with me where people were pitching in stuff, and she also pitched her own book. So that's one way of actually, come to think of it, that's a different way of doing things that isn't the open submissions windows. It's some organizations and magazines and stuff might contact a publisher or an agent and say, "Can we have a pitching session with you?" And our readers pitch in their work.
Yeah, so I've never done one of these. I think you've done a couple, haven't you? You did one for Mislexia, and I want to say you did one in Manchester. Is that right?
I did, yeah. So a sit-down one for the people who graduated from the MA at Manchester University.
So it sounds a bit like speed dating or something like that.
Yeah, it was a lot like speed dating, but even more awkward because it just involved people who write. People who write tend to be people, so... Yeah, but these things, I'm always fairly skeptical of the efficacy of the speed dating type thing. But Eliza's experience, or the experience we had with Eliza, I think the pitch was so good. Like you said, you read the pitch, that I was like, yeah, this sounds great. And I think, if you've got the great pitch, you can snap up an agent or a publisher at these events, but you really have to have it like down on pat.
Yeah, and at least have a few chapters or a good, those first 50 pages, those first 3 chapters have got to be pretty white hot. They've got to be, good to go. The rest of the book can be worked on, but they've got to be really grabbing people from the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to the unagented submissions again, it's just like you were saying with Eliza, you don't know about the efficacy of it. How many hits do you get out of so many submissions? You might say the same about being open in January 2019, getting nearly 400 submissions. Is it worth our time when there's 2-3 people reading through it? I'd say yes. I think some of the books we got through that open submissions period were absolutely fantastic. A good example would be Exercises in Control by Annabelle Banks that came out in February, and the upcoming Famished by Anna Vaught, both really great collections that actually it was Sanya who picked out. She said to me, said maybe you should read this, and they were great. So I think it does work, but it's a huge amount of time and effort on our part, isn't it? Which is why we only do it maybe once every year, maybe once every 2 years.
It is a huge effort because it takes, like you say, so much reading. And when we got Shiromi Pinto's Plastic Emotions from an open window, specifically for women writers of colour, because we balance our list a little bit in terms of its variety of the background variety of our authors. And, Shiromi's came in the 11th hour, more or less, of that window. And then again, Sanya, praise be to Sanya, she picked that out, and then that's it. But we had, again, maybe 200 manuscripts from that, I think.
Yeah. Which is it's quite an intimidating hit rate, isn't it? I remember at Ambit, which is more for short stories, I think the percentage rate of publication was less than 1%, which just sounds quite terrifying. I don't want it to sound off-putting to people, but
yeah. Okay, we've gone through half an hour already. I think we're gonna have to start speeding this up.
Have we? Okay.
Yeah. So what's on our next?
So I think we talked a lot about what we look for at Influx, that side of things. Maybe why don't we talk about maybe some of our own experiences as writers of acceptance and rejection, and then we were going to say how to handle rejection. And I saw we had one question on Twitter before this, which was what's the best or maybe worst response we've gotten to sending out a rejection to somebody. So rack your brains in there. I mean, I can start on like my experience. So this is what I find it useful, having worked as a commissioning editor and also a writer. So I've been writing fiction. I try to take it seriously, I think, from my late 20s onwards. Those first few years where I was writing stuff, hardly any of it got published. I look back at it now and cringe at a lot of it. A lot of it's pretty terrible. I can see what I was trying to do.
But you can see why it was rejected at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, me with my editor hat on could see exactly what they were rejected, like some good ideas, but horribly laboured, pretentious, po-faced, awful things.
Wait,
but I also
are you saying that was in the past?
That was in the past, yeah. But so imagine what I
write now. Has changed.
Imagine what I write now, and imagine how bad it must have been back then.
I feel for those editors, mate.
And I'm not going to lie. I think every aspiring writer, if you're writing short fiction, that's obviously a way you sort of build up your CV before you might move on to getting your novel published. You've got to have a thick skin. You have to have a thick skin because you are going to get rejected most of the time. Now, go forward 10 years or so, I've had a few books out, nominated for a couple of prizes, published in lots of different literary journals. But I would say, still, when I send out a piece of short fiction or something, there's still a very, very good chance it will get rejected. That happens still all the time because it might just not be right for the venue, the journal. That they might be looking for something different. They might have already got a story that's like that, and therefore there's no space for them to do that. I might be pitching a new book. They've already got a book like that in that year's schedule. Therefore, they might love the book. They can't publish it, which is something that we've had to do ourselves. We really like this book, but the schedule's full. We can't do it, or it's too similar to this one we're already publishing, we can't publish similar books in the same month, that kind of thing.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because that there's sort of two sides to that, really, and I like to think our side is legit, where it's like, our schedule's full, or it's too similar to another book we're doing. But the dangerous flip side of that is, I think within some systemic issues in publishing can be, and I've heard this a lot from friends, someone will say, oh, we've already got an Asian book this month, or we've already got a black author on our list, or whatever, like that. These things are anecdotal, and I've heard them many times, and I think there's maybe it's a thick line, but there's a thin line between deciding what is similar and what isn't similar. And I think that see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I was talking about specifically, like, if you were going to do a book of like dark literary horror short stories, you wouldn't maybe release them in the same period. This is what you're saying is kind of anecdotal. I don't want to comment too much, but I'd resist the idea of there being an Asian book, a black kind of book. But I do see what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying, but there isn't. Obviously, that's why I'm saying it's ridiculous. But it's certainly, most, I don't know now, but things have slightly improved. But it's certainly, these things have been said, and I think it's when people have considered the background of the author to be the genre itself.
Of course.
So, but it's certainly that thing of you've already got a story like this, or you've already something like that. That happens all the time, and I think particularly in the what you write, or I don't know. It's interesting because you have a style and you have an approach which I think is consistent throughout your work.
Yeah.
Do you get direct commissions because of that? My impression would be, if you have a particular style and a particular way, or a way of doing writing and a particular approach to things, someone will be like, oh, we're putting this together. Gary writes like this. Why don't we get him in?
Yeah, absolutely. That happens now, but that only happens after, I suppose, you've paid your dues for a bit. Do you know what I mean? After you've had maybe a few stories out, you've had a collection out, you've had a novel out. That does happen now, but that's something that people definitely, you have to work to kind of get to that point. And even then, you're never going to, it's not a guarantee that people are going to do that. And I think also sometimes, I think it's important for a writer to sort of, if they do have a style, I think it's okay to kind of stick to that style and be aware that sometimes that style is probably going to be more in fashion and other times less so. It depends what kind of writer you want to be.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask you, what's your experience? You're a short fiction writer, but also you had a very successful, I suppose, fairly commercial non-fiction book. I mean, which are two very different things, aren't they?
Very, very different. I think the Wetherspoon's Carpets book is very much, I suppose, the thing I'm most associated with, rather than whatever random short stories I had published in places like Ambit or whatever.
But I mean, that's a big hit, being in Ambit. Do you know what I mean? That's it's a prestigious literary journal.
It's nice. I mean, I think I tried. I cut my teeth a little bit doing short stories, but where I really grew into my own writing, I think, was through writing, doing journalism and articles and stuff like that. Particularly, I wrote a lot of Vice. I've written quite a bit for the New Statesman and Prospect magazine, and I've even done stuff for like Architectural Digest, and where you actually you work out how to get your ideas and the story or the narrative across in a very short space of time. The amount of words is often very restrictive, so it's about concision and communication in that respect. And I think that really helps when you then go to like a book level.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
On the other hand, Wetherspoon's Carpets is most of that's made up anyway. So is it fiction? Is it not fiction? Who knows? But
how was that commission though? We're talking about acceptance.
Yeah, that was interesting. So when I did a blog, I did a Tumblr. That went viral, and then I met my agent Sarah at a festival, book festival. She wasn't my agent at the time. We just met at this book festival, and we had a drink. She knew me from Influx stuff, and then I kind of told her about the blog, and she had already heard of it. And then she said, "Well, why don't we do a book?" And I said, "Okay." And then she basically got me to write a proposal. She finessed the proposal with me, which is like almost like a synopsis, but for non-fiction, it's like, what am I going to write? What's it going to look like? Who's it for? And then she sent it out on very commercial submission. So it went to, Penguin, Hachette, I think it went to Harper as well, as in the broad umbrellas, specific imprints within there. And then there was a bit of an auction.
So essentially, you had already, without knowing it, you had the great hook, the great pitch. Someone saw they could sell that book, and they were right in the end, weren't they?
They were right. Now, what's been interesting since then is, so publishers have asked me kind of to do something similar, and I've not wanted to do something similar. My next proposal I did was about traveling up and down. This is post Brexit, but so it's traveling up and down the country playing cricket with various different communities within Britain. So I was supposed to be going up and down the country playing with like Yorkshire mining team, playing with a clergy team in Sussex, playing with a Pakistani restaurant owning team in Birmingham, playing with a Caribbean team in Chapeltown in Leeds, and getting a makeup of the UK through its cricket communities. And
Sounds great. I hate cricket. I hate cricket, and I would read that book.
Well, turns out no one else wanted to commission it. So, and I worked really hard on that proposal, and it came off the back of a very successful commercial book, but none of the editors could see the value in it, and it got roundly rejected.
Yeah.
So I went from having the first book being part of a kind of competitive auction between publishers, to then the next, and that being a success, and then the next book, everyone just saying no. And
it's interesting.
That's where the thick skin comes in, because it's not personal. No one's saying you can't write this. You know, they've all seen I can do the books, but they just don't believe in the book that I'm pitching itself. So I try not to take it personally.
It's funny, I've actually got that written down here. I'm aware time is probably running out, right? So maybe we can finish up with talking about how to handle rejection, and then we can talk about our sort of what's the kind of worst response we ever got to sending out these. You've already said it. I would say, and I say this as a commissioning editor and as a writer myself, you can't take these things, you can't take it personally. Like I said, if you're sending out your unagented novel submission, you sent it to Influx, we've got 400 of these submissions. It's just, it's a simple case of the maths there. We literally can't publish anything. And there's so many books that I have had to reject, books that I like. There's far more of those than books we've published. And it's actually, like you said, it's not a pleasant experience. I think there's a misconception sometimes, especially on social media, that there's some sort of elite cabal of small press editors all in cahoots with each other, sort of designed to kind of, I don't know, only publish their friends. And I'd really like to kind of say that really isn't true. We're always looking for new, fresh stuff, but we can only publish so much a year. We're a very small team. So it's just, don't take it personally. I would also say, if you get a kind of non-boilerplate response, by which I mean saying, thanks for sending your work in, it wasn't for us. If you get kind of more detailed feedback, I think it's worth pointing out to writers that that's actually very, very unusual, that an editor's taken the time to say, this wasn't quite right, but I love this, and this. If you change it, or we want to see more of your work, that editor means it, because most of the time they're sending out a generic rejection.
Absolutely. If you get something more than a generic rejection in your rejection,
you're going in the right direction.
Yeah, you are going in the right direction. I think there's 2 points I want to pick up there. One is, yes, thick skin, massively important, but not so thick that you don't listen to the feedback. from
Yes,
the editor.
Very good point.
So
Yeah.
it's sort of, you have to be open. Like if the editor's gives you a little bit more feedback than would be necessary and says, it wasn't quite right for us because we didn't feel that the setting was interesting enough, on the top of my head, or that the main character's journey just didn't convince us, or the writing is too prosaic, or whatever. Take that on board. Don't be so thick-skinned that you're like, oh well, fuck you then. I'm going to carry on writing wherever I want to write.
So it's like, be thick-skinned, but don't be arrogant either. So it's like walking on that kind of tightrope between those.
And the other thing I want to pick up is also going back to this idea that not all, we're living in a world that is structured and systemed and in a way that privileges certain people from certain backgrounds. And sometimes I think the thick skin is necessary, but there's also, it's okay to think that if you are marginalized or from a marginalized community or from an ethnic minority or something like that, that there may be underlying biases as well. Like that's not out of the question. And I think it's okay to be sensitive about that. I don't think recommending a thick skin for that is the right thing.
I think that's a really good point. So, I mean, how do you deal with that issue? There are definitely still issues with, like you said, unconscious bias to do with people's ethnicity, their economic background, their class, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm sure every editor in the world would like to think that they're not, they don't fall foul of those things, but I'm sure everyone does to some extent, and their prejudices might be different in different ways. So, how would you deal with that? I'm saying have a thick skin, but it also doesn't mean just accepting this is the way it has to be either. I think that's what we're saying. So how do you negotiate that without kind of getting really, overly angry about it? Maybe getting.
I think if you're
bitter about things.
If you're a writer that feels that way, talk to other writers. Because you can often feel like you're going mad inside your own head. And if you talk to other writers and they're having a similar experience with the same publisher or the same editor at a publishing house, then you can be like, oh, okay, it is that. It's not that my work is shit. It is because the editor has particular bias or prejudice. The other thing would be, I think, to eliminate that is to approach publishers who publish work that you think is similar to you or to your work.
This goes back to doing your research, doesn't it? About who you're sending stuff to.
Let's say you're South Asian descent. You might look at, we published Shiromi. You might think, oh, okay, they've already published a woman of Sri Lankan descent. If I send them something in, I might feel a little bit more confident that they won't just dismiss it out of hand. Or you've got, there's at the moment within the small press scene anyway, quite a lot of very good, diverse publications. But you might also look at the much more commercial end of things and see something. If you're writing a crime novel, you might want to look up who published Abir Mukherjee's crime novels, and look at them. If you're trying to kind of, if you feel suspicious about it, then there's ways of kind of mitigating that a little bit. I think that's kind of what I would say. But again, like throwing any personal work out there is a danger to your sensitivities, I suppose. So there is a certain amount of thick skin you need as a base layer to start with.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think that key things we keep coming up over here aren't they? So doing your research, who you're sending stuff to. And I think a bit of perseverance as well, and be prepared to, I don't want to say be prepared to fail, but be prepared to be knocked back a few times, rejected a few times. I'd also say just remember that editors have their own tastes. What works for one editor might not work for me just because I have a certain taste in kind of writing. I hope I can recognise good writing outside of what I would normally read as a reader. But some things just won't work for me that will work for others. And the more kind of stylized a kind of novel in terms of its prose is, I think you'll see that more. You'll see that more. Some editors will love it, some will hate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with the perseverance thing, It's always banded around social media. Oh, J.K. Rowling got rejected all the time until Williams redid whatever. Like, fine. Stephen King used to throw darts at the editors' faces, or I don't know, whatever it is.
Or the editor as the enemy. Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah. So there is perseverance, but there needs to be sympathy on both ends. I think as an editor, I don't like sending rejections. It doesn't feel good to say no to people all the time. And the editor is saying no far more times than they're saying yes. So you're constantly breaking people's hearts, destroying their dreams, letting them down, and that as an emotional weight can weigh quite heavy, I think, particularly when it's something you really like.
Yeah.
But you can't
publish it. And I do sometimes see this impression that this sense maybe that some people believe that editors enjoy rejecting people's work. Mm-hmm. And I can't speak for everyone else, but for me, it's like, I hate doing it. I hate it. It's a real downer.
That's because you're a soft, cuddly bear, Gary.
I'm a soft, cuddly bear.
Yeah.
I maybe this could go back to our sort of don'ts bit. So I know we need to wrap up very soon. So can you think of any good examples of where you've sent out a rejection and had, let's say, a less than pleased reply to that? Because I've had them. I'm trying to think of any specific ones. I can think of a very sort of general type of response I get to those. They could be pretty disheartening, to be honest.
I've not had a specific reply to a specific rejection, but what really infuriates me is if we're doing an open window for a particular demographic. Mm-hmm. So let's say it's non-fiction women writers, or it's writers of color, or it's women writers of color, or whatever. And there's always someone who sends in their work and says, I might not be a black woman, but I think you should read this anyway. And it's by some guy called Tom, and he's from Suffolk. And you're just like, why are you sending this now? This is not, what you don't seem to understand is, A, I'm not going to look at it. B, I'm going to think you're an idiot for sending it during this window. So you're doing yourself more of a disservice than if you just shut up about it.
No, I would agree. I think if there's a specific brief we put out there for a certain kind of writing, and you knowingly submit your work against that, going, I know this isn't what your brief says, but will you take note anyway? It sounds very harsh, but you're not going to take any notice of it. In fact, you're doing yourself harm, I think.
It's the equivalent of someone saying, send us some children's books, and you send in a 1,000-page adult novel. Yeah. So why would you do that?
I mean, for me, I've definitely sent rejections before to both short stories, my time at places like Ambit and Unsung, and for novels were just, I think, we were saying don't take it personally, where the author has taken it personally, and it's not really very pleasant. I mean, you might sometimes get a bit of a chuckle out of it, but often it's not nice, and you sort of tell that maybe you've, I don't know, wounded someone's ego a little bit, which is not what you want to do. But I've had some very shitty emails back from people saying, essentially they're saying, you're an idiot, I'm a genius.
Yeah, well, they're not, are they? So, you might be a misunderstood genius, but the only person who's misunderstanding it is you.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I also say to people, don't do that, because I'm not saying I would tend to remember that name, and so then if they submit it again, it's not like I've got my little black book of people. Yeah. But if I've had that bad interaction with someone, let's say we're open again for submissions, they send something in, I'll be like, that name sounds familiar. I go back through the emails, and I was like, oh, it's this person who insulted me. So you can see how that would do you damage.
Don't burn your bridges.
Don't burn your bridges. I think that's good advice. Yeah.
Should we end it on that?
We can end it on that, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. Or maybe just burn those bridges when you come to them.
I'm trying to work out what that means. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I think that's enough. We probably rambled enough for this. But yeah, I think in general, thick skin, rejections are hard on both ends, to the author and from the editor. And just keep going. Keep writing. The only way you're going to get better is if you keep writing.
Absolute truth.
All right. Until next week.
Until next week. Goodbye.
Okay.